The dawn broke pale and indifferent over Whitethorn Manor, casting its first ashen light upon stone walls that had witnessed generations of triumphs, betrayals, and the careful choreography of aristocratic restraint. A fine drizzle still clung to the landscape, softening the sharp lines of the estate as if the heavens themselves hesitated to reveal the full severity of what awaited the young woman approaching its gates. Inside the chilled carriage, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe pressed a steadying hand against her trembling ribs, willing her breath into silence. She had rehearsed calmness, dignity, grace, yet none of it could still the ache of leaving behind everything familiar for a marriage forged not by affection but necessity. Her gloved fingers tightened slightly as the carriage halted. The footman opened the door, and the damp air rushed in, cold enough to make her eyes sting. When Eleanor stepped onto the gravel, she felt the weight of the manor's presence settle over her like an unwelcome mantle, an edifice built for grandeur, not warmth. Servants paused in their morning tasks to observe her, their eyes sweeping over her modest traveling gown and simple bonnet with thinly veiled comparison to the late Duchess, whose elegance still haunted the corridors. Eleanor straightened, remembering her governess's warning that the world offered no mercy for those who appeared uncertain. Beneath the entrance archway stood the man she had been bound to marry. Duke Alastair Hawthorne did not offer a smile, nor even the courtesy of stepping forward. He waited with a soldier's stillness, arms folded behind his back, as though assessing a new regiment rather than greeting a bride. The rain had dampened the dark curls at his temples, and the severity of his features, angular cheekbones, a jaw carved by stubborn resolve, gave him the air of a commander who had long ago learned to bury tenderness beneath discipline. His gaze swept over Eleanor with a measured disinterest that felt colder than the weather. "You arrive sooner than expected," he said, voice carrying the flat neutrality of formality rather than welcome. "Your chamber has been prepared." Eleanor dipped her head respectfully. "I am grateful, Your Grace." Something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Not warmth, but perhaps a faint surprise at her composure. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. His tone sharpened, the words executed with the detached efficiency of a man delivering orders stripped of sentiment. "You will sleep in the attic. It is quiet, and away from the household's activity. I trust you will not find the arrangement disagreeable." The words struck with the subtle brutality of a blade sheathed in protocol. Eleanor felt the servants shift uncomfortably, just slightly, as if they too understood the humiliation embedded in the decree. A bride sent immediately to the attic was not a cherished lady of the manor but a tolerated presence, an obligation, a shadow kept out of sight. Yet her expression remained composed. The facade must not fracture. She folded her trembling fingers together. "I shall abide by your wishes, Your Grace." His nod was curt, final. Without another word, he turned and vanished inside the manor, leaving her standing alone in the echo of damp stone and watching eyes. A footman gestured for her to follow. As Eleanor stepped through the great doors, she sensed whispers rise behind her like a rustling breeze, discreet, poisonous. "The country girl. Not a shred of refinement. She will not last a season." The hall swallowed their voices as the footman led her through a maze of opulent chambers. Chandeliers shimmered like frozen waterfalls overhead, spilling pale light onto marble floors polished to a mirror sheen. Portraits of imposing Hawthorne ancestors lined the walls, their stern eyes seeming to measure her worth against centuries of aristocratic expectation. She wondered whether any of them had ever entered this marriage willingly, or if duty had dictated their lives as thoroughly as it now dictated hers. She was shown briefly into the drawing room, where a cluster of noblewomen lounged like elegant predators. One lifted her lorgnette, studying Eleanor with idle cruelty. Another whispered behind a fan, though her voice carried enough for its target to hear. "So this is the new Duchess. A fragile little thing, isn't she?" Eleanor felt heat bloom in her cheeks but kept her gaze respectfully lowered. Her upbringing had taught her that retorts only fed gossip. Silence, delivered with grace, was often the stronger defense. Yet the sting of their amusement pierced deeper than she wished to admit. She had hoped, naively perhaps, that she would be greeted with civility, if not kindness. The footman resumed the escort, guiding her up several flights of narrowing staircases. With each ascent, the air grew cooler, the floors creaked with age, and the grandeur dissolved into utilitarian simplicity. Eleanor's breath shortened. At last, they reached a small wooden door tucked beneath an eave. The footman opened it, revealing a sparse attic chamber lit faintly by a single narrow window. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, and the scent of forgotten years lingered. Eleanor stepped inside. The room felt as though it had not been touched since childhood laughter once warmed it. Against the wall stood a small, weathered bed with a frayed blanket and a lone pillow flattened by time. Upon it lay a small wooden horse, its paint chipped and faded by tender hands long gone. She stared at it, unsure who had placed it there or why. A token forgotten, or left deliberately. The question quietly unsettled her. "You may ring the bell if you require anything," the footman said, though his tone implied he doubted she would. He paused, almost pitying, then added softly, "I shall bring up your trunk shortly." After a brief bow, he withdrew, closing the door. Silence settled like dust. Eleanor gently touched the wooden horse, feeling the chipped edges beneath her fingertips. It was the first object in the manor that did not seem to judge her. She placed it carefully on the bedside table, then walked to the window. Below, she could see the sweeping gardens blurred by rain, and far in the distance, the dark silhouette of the Duke riding across the fields, a lone figure cutting through wind and fog as though the world itself bowed to his solitude. She wondered what sort of life awaited her with a man who did not look at her but looked through her, as if she were already a disappointment he had learned to endure. Yet somewhere deep within her, a flame of unyielding resolve stirred. She had not entered this marriage to crumble beneath coldness. She would navigate this unfamiliar world with quiet resilience, even if every step required her to rebuild herself. As the sky darkened and rain began to lash the roof, Eleanor sat upon the bed, folding her hands in her lap. The wooden horse watched from the bedside table as though guarding secrets of the past. She felt the first true tremor of uncertainty pulse through her, yet also the faintest whisper of curiosity. Who had left this small relic? And who would care enough to place it where she, a stranger in this house, would find it? Outside, thunder rumbled over Whitethorn Manor as the first night of her arranged life began. Unbeknownst to her, something within these walls had already taken notice of her gentle presence. And though she could not name it yet, a shift had begun, one that would unravel every cold barrier, every shadow, every unspoken truth buried in the corridors below. The attic room felt like exile, yet within its modest confines lay the quiet beginning of something neither she nor the Duke could foresee. Morning seeped slowly into the attic, its muted light filtering through the small window and falling across Eleanor's face. She opened her eyes to a hush so complete it felt almost reverential, as though the manor itself waited to judge whether she would break or endure. The wooden horse still rested on the bedside table, a quiet sentinel, and when she rose, she found something else beside it, a pressed white rose, its petals ghostly pale against the coarse wood. It had not been there when she retired. Eleanor held it delicately, her heart tightening at the improbable tenderness of the gesture. Someone within these walls had offered her a kindness, and the mystery unsettled her more than unkindness ever could. She dressed with care, smoothing down the wrinkles in her gown and tying her hair with a simple ribbon. She refused to appear diminished, no matter the circumstances. Descending the stairs, she passed servants who could not resist glancing at her with a curiosity tinged by judgment. A faint whisper floated behind her. The attic, imagine that. But she ignored it, fixing her attention on the day ahead. In the breakfast room she found the Duke seated alone at the long polished table, a porcelain cup before him and a newspaper spread open at his elbow. He did not rise or greet her. His eyes, a cool iron gray, slid toward her briefly before returning to the page. Eleanor approached with measured composure, pausing across from him. The sunlight framed him in a way that emphasized his austerity, as though his features had been carved from stone rather than flesh. "Good morning, Your Grace," she offered. "Lady Eleanor," he replied. his tone bearing no warmth yet lacking hostility. It was merely a mannered acknowledgement, the bare minimum required by propriety. She took her seat. Silence unfolded, broken only by the faint clinking of silverware and the rustle of the newspaper. Eleanor attempted to study him without being obvious, noticing the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the rigidity of his posture. He carried his burdens with the discipline of a man who allowed neither rest nor softness. The quiet was abruptly pierced by murmurs drifting in from the hallway. Two visiting ladies passed the open doorway, their conversation intentionally unrestrained. He gives her the attic, imagine the humiliation. And after such a quiet wedding too. One would think he regrets the match already. Eleanor felt a flush crawl up her neck, but she kept her gaze fixed downward. She waited for the Duke to dismiss the gossip or close the door. He did neither. Instead, he turned the page of his newspaper with dispassionate calm, as though the dialogue concerned strangers. A cold knot formed in her chest. She excused herself gently and withdrew before emotion betrayed her composure. After breakfast, Eleanor wandered the manor in search of a quiet place to collect her bearings. The corridors felt endless, a maze of velvet drapes, ancestral portraits, and polished banisters. Near the east wing, she happened upon the conservatory, where warm light filtered through tall glass panes. The scent of damp earth and blooming violets wrapped around her like a balm. She lingered there, allowing the tranquility to soften the sting of the gossip. A faint rustle drew her attention. Two children, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, peeked from behind a marble column. Their faces were pale, cautious, and marked by a reticence that suggested they were seldom spoken to tenderly. Eleanor knelt quietly, offering a small smile. "Hello," she said softly. "You need not hide from me." The little girl stepped forward first, her small hand clutching her brother's sleeve. "Are you the new Duchess?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Eleanor nodded. "I suppose I am." The boy's eyes widened. "Do you know how to mend things? Our kite broke, and no one will fix it." She extended a hand, palm up. "Show me." Their hesitance melted into trust, and the boy placed the torn kite into her hands. She examined it with care, her fingers gentle. "This can be mended," she assured. The children's faces brightened, a fragile flicker of hope. It was the first smile she had seen in the manor. But the moment shattered when a stern voice intruded. Lady Agatha, one of the Duke's cousins, appeared in the doorway, her expression severe. "Children, you must not disturb her. Off you go." Her gaze shifted to Eleanor with frosty condescension. "You need not involve yourself in matters beyond your concern, Lady Eleanor. Their care is arranged." Eleanor rose. "I only wished to be of help." "Help?" Agatha echoed with a thin smile. "How noble." She swept away before Eleanor could respond. The children cast her apologetic glances before running after their guardian. Eleanor watched them disappear, her heart tightening with a quiet ache. Kindness, it seemed, was unwelcome currency in these halls. When she turned to leave, she almost collided with the Duke himself. He stood silently, his expression unreadable. Eleanor stepped back quickly, lowering her gaze. "My apologies, Your Grace." He regarded her a moment too long, his eyes lingering on her face as though seeing something he had not previously noticed. "There is no need," he said quietly. A servant hurrying past dropped a silver tray, the sharp clang echoing through the conservatory. Startled, Eleanor stepped back instinctively, and found herself steadied by the Duke's hand at her elbow. His touch, though brief, was firm and protective. Her breath caught. He withdrew at once, as though surprised by his own impulse. "You are safe," he murmured, voice softer than she had ever heard. "I would not let you fall." The words unsettled her deeply, stirring a warmth she had no right to feel. Before she could respond, he turned away, his composure resealing like armor. The rest of the afternoon unfolded beneath a cloud of whispers. As Eleanor moved through the manor, she noticed glances cast toward her, conversations halted mid-sentence, and knowing smiles exchanged with thinly veiled malice. A rumor had taken root, one that painted her as scheming, seeking favor through the children. Each whisper scratched at her dignity, but she carried herself with unyielding grace, refusing to furnish her detractors with evidence of distress. That evening, when she climbed back to the attic, exhaustion weighed upon her. Yet as she opened the door, this fatigue was replaced by something sharper: astonishment. On her pillow lay a silver bookmark, delicately engraved with a hawthorn branch. It gleamed in the candlelight, an object far too refined to be forgotten or misplaced. Eleanor lifted it with trembling fingers. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the metal warm as though recently handled. The scent of faint cedar clung to it, a scent she had noticed only once before, when the Duke had stepped close enough for her to feel the heat of his presence. Her heart quickened. Could it be from him? Or someone else with deeper motives? The rain tapped gently at the window, a soft percussion to the uncertainty gathering in her chest. She set the bookmark beside the pressed rose and the wooden horse. 3 tokens left without explanation, 3 gestures that together formed a puzzle whose answer lay somewhere within the vast, watchful estate. As she extinguished the candle, a realization flickered through her like a spark in the dark. Someone was observing her closely. Whether the intention was benevolent or perilous remained unknown, but the awareness sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of awakening intrigue. The attic no longer felt like exile. It felt like the threshold of something quietly brewing, unseen but inexorable, ready to shift the axis of her life in ways she could not yet fathom. The storm rolled in with a ferocity that felt almost sentient, thickening the sky into slate-colored layers as though nature itself intended to pry open the secrets buried within Whitethorn Manor. Eleanor stood at her attic window, watching wind whip through the gardens, bending the trees as if urging them to bow before the tempest. The room had grown increasingly cold over the hours. Drafts hissed through the cracks in the walls, and droplets of rain began slipping between the warped window panes. She clutched the shawl around her shoulders, but the chill crept in regardless, a reminder of the fragility of her position in this indifferent house. When lightning split the sky, its sharp light exposed the truth she had been trying to ignore. Water pooled beneath the window, spreading steadily across the floorboards. A section of the ceiling groaned ominously, swollen from the unending deluge. Eleanor moved quickly, rescuing what few belongings she had, placing the pressed rose, the wooden horse, and the silver bookmark safely atop a shelf. A cold rivulet dripped onto her wrist. She looked up. The ceiling bowed, then split. A torrent fell directly onto her bed, extinguishing the fragile warmth the room had held. Eleanor gasped and stepped back, her slippers soaking through instantly. Within moments, the attic was no longer habitable. Panic pricked her chest, but she steadied herself with a breath. She had endured humiliation, whispers, and isolation. A storm would not break her. She gathered her belongings into her arms and hurried down the narrow staircase. The corridor below was dim, the sconces flickering weakly in the encroaching gloom. Servants rushed in and out of rooms as the wind howled against the manor's shutters. Eleanor stopped one, a maid with kind eyes and trembling hands. "My attic room is flooding," Eleanor said. "Do you know where I should go?" The maid hesitated, darting a glance down the hallway as if fearful of giving the wrong answer. "His Grace is in the west study. Perhaps he might decide for you." Eleanor nodded, though the thought of seeking the Duke's guidance filled her with unease. She made her way toward the west wing, the manor creaking beneath the storm's force, as if old bones were groaning in protest. She found Alistair standing near a tall window, a single lamp illuminating his figure. Rain hammered mercilessly against the glass. His silhouette appeared carved from shadows and restraint. He turned when he heard her soft footsteps. For a heartbeat, he simply stared, his eyes moving from her damp hair to the bundle clutched in her arms. "Lady Eleanor," he said, stepping forward. "You are soaked. What in heaven's name are you doing wandering the corridors in this weather?" "My room," she whispered, pushing stray tendrils of hair back from her face. The storm has breached the attic. I had nowhere else to go. His jaw tightened, not with irritation but something closer to guilt. He crossed the space between them, taking the dripping shawl from her arms and setting it aside with unexpected gentleness. You should have called for assistance. You must not remain up there. It was never meant for more than occasional storage. His eyes settled on her again, softer this time. You are not to return until repairs are made. She folded her hands to keep them from trembling. Where should I stay, Your Grace? He hesitated, just briefly, but it was enough for her to see the conflict flicker across his gaze. Then he gestured toward the hearth at the far end of the study, where a fire crackled, casting warm light across shelves heavy with books and framed maps. For tonight here, he said. The study is warm, and the storm has not breached this wing. Sit by the fire. Eleanor approached the hearth, drawn to its heat with an almost desperate relief. Alistair followed, retrieving a woolen blanket from a nearby chaise and placing it carefully around her shoulders. The gesture, intimate in its simplicity, caught her breath. This was not the aloof duke she had met upon arrival. This was a man wrestling with the shards of his own restraint. You are shivering, he observed. The storm surprised me, she replied, though she suspected he understood that the storm was only part of the reason. He studied her face, his expression unreadable. Then he looked away, pacing once before speaking again. You should not have been placed in the attic. Eleanor blinked. Pardon me, Your Grace. It was ill-judged. His voice was steady but low, as though speaking too loudly would break something he could not afford to shatter. You deserved better accommodations than that. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. Then may I ask, why was I sent there? He stopped pacing. The firelight cast shifting shadows across his features, making his guarded expression seem carved from contradiction. Because affection, he said slowly, is a currency I am no longer certain I possess. Eleanor absorbed the words, feeling their weight press into her. I did not seek affection, she replied softly. Only a place where I might exist without intrusion or disdain. A long silence followed. The storm raged just beyond the walls, wind battering the manor with untempered fury. Alistair moved closer, resting one hand on the mantel as though steadying himself. My late wife, he began, then stopped. It was the first time he had alluded to her. Eleanor lowered her eyes, granting him the dignity of choosing how much to say. Her death shadowed this household. I withdrew from society, from trust, and when our marriage was arranged, I believed distance would be safer. For you? Eleanor asked quietly. For both of us, he answered. She lifted her gaze to meet his. I do not wish to harm you, Your Grace. His eyes softened, the first true thaw she had witnessed. I know. I have begun to see that. For a moment, the space between them felt fragile, vibrating with a kind of tension that emerges not from romance but from the desperate hope that two wounded people might find shelter in one another's silence. He turned and crossed to his desk, retrieving an embroidered shawl. Its embroidery was delicate, depicting pale blossoms stitched with careful artistry. When he placed it into her hands, she recognized it as something of value, not for its fabric but for its sentiment. It belonged to my mother, he said quietly. She valued warmth. As should you. Eleanor brushed her fingertips across the embroidery. I am honored. The Duke inclined his head, a subtle acknowledgement of trust offered, however hesitantly. Keep it. You may need it if the storm persists. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the window panes. Eleanor stood, intending to thank him properly, but when she took a step toward the door of the study, he spoke her name for the first time. Eleanor. She froze at the sound, warmth blooming through her like dawn breaking through fog. You deserved far better than the attic, he said, his voice gentle in a way that seemed almost foreign to his nature. And perhaps more than I have allowed you. The words lingered in the air, an unspoken promise suspended between storm and firelight. Eleanor held his gaze, her heart stirring with the quiet hope she had buried since the moment she first arrived. As she left the study, the storm continued to rage outside. But within Whitethorn Manor, something far greater had begun to shift, as if the very walls awaited what would unfold next. The following days unfolded with an uneasy rhythm that neither Eleanor nor the Duke could comfortably inhabit. Each morning began with the manor's quiet routines, yet beneath the polished calm lingered a tension neither of them dared to name. Eleanor noticed how the servants' gazes shifted whenever the Duke entered a room, as though they expected his temper to ignite at any moment. Instead, he carried himself with a composed distance that unsettled her more deeply than any outward anger could. She wanted to understand the nature of his restraint, but every attempt at conversation was met with a polite reserve that revealed nothing and concealed everything. The children, perceptive in the way only the emotionally deprived can be, watched both adults closely. Clara stayed near Eleanor, choosing silent proximity over words, but Thomas hovered at doorframes, suspicious, as though waiting for Eleanor to reveal some hidden cruelty. It pained her to see so much guardedness in such young faces, and it forced her to reckon with the reality that they had learned to expect disappointment. This recognition intensified her resolve to anchor herself in their lives with sincerity, regardless of how slow or challenging the process became. She sensed, however, that her efforts were being observed by someone whose judgment mattered even more. Late one afternoon, as Eleanor walked through the west garden with Clara, the child glanced up at her with an expression that held both curiosity and unease. "Why do you stay?" Clara asked, tugging gently at a drooping lavender stalk. "You could leave if you wanted. People do." The simplicity of the question struck Eleanor with unexpected force. She had prepared for hostility, defensiveness, even resentment, but not this quiet, aching doubt. Kneeling to Clara's height, Eleanor reached for the child's hand. "I stay because I choose to," she said. "And because none of you deserve to be abandoned. Not ever again." Clara's eyes shimmered with a fragile, searching hope, but before either could speak further, Thomas's voice cut through the air from several yards away. "Father wants you," he announced coolly, directing the message to Eleanor rather than his sister. He did not wait for a response before turning on his heel and disappearing toward the manor. Clara exhaled softly, both disappointed and relieved. Eleanor steadied her breath, preparing herself for what the Duke might wish to discuss, and made her way back inside, her steps echoing down the long corridor as though announcing her uncertainty in advance. She found him in the study, standing before the fireplace with his hands clasped behind his back. The flame cast a muted glow along the hard lines of his face, sharpening the contrast between strength and exhaustion. When he turned to her, his expression bore none of the cold detachment she had braced for. Instead, there was an unreadable complexity, like a man wrestling with a truth he wished he could ignore but could no longer contain. "I understand you have been spending considerable time with the children," he began, not as an accusation but as an observation weighed by significance. Eleanor nodded, choosing silence over unnecessary explanations. "They speak of you," he continued. "Clara more than Thomas, though both in ways I did not anticipate." His tone held no distrust, but Eleanor could sense the tremor of vulnerability beneath the quiet delivery. This conversation mattered to him, perhaps more than he wished it did. She responded with calm deliberation, explaining that she only wished for the children to feel seen and safe. When she finished, the Duke's gaze lingered on her for a long moment before he exhaled, closing the distance between them by a few measured steps. "You must understand," he said, his voice thickening slightly. "Their mother left wounds that time has not yet mended. I am uncertain whether my presence heals or worsens them." It was the first time he had spoken directly of the past, and the confession landed with startling weight. Eleanor felt the gravity of it settle over them both. She approached cautiously, aware that any misstep could cause him to retreat again. "Pain does not make you unworthy of them," she replied. "It only makes you human." The honesty of her words surprised even her, and she feared she might have overstepped. But the Duke did not recoil. Instead, He regarded her with an intensity that revealed how deeply her perception affected him. For a moment, the air between them shifted, charged with something tentative yet profoundly important, an understanding being built in quiet fragments rather than dramatic declarations. He broke the silence with a question that seemed to emerge from an internal struggle he had long delayed confronting. "Do you trust me?" he asked. The question was so unexpected, so startlingly personal, that Eleanor faltered. She searched his face, trying to discern whether he sought reassurance or revelation. "I trust what I have seen," she answered carefully. "And what I see is a man trying to protect his family, even if he fears he may fail them." He breathed out slowly, as though her response had struck a point within him he rarely allowed others to reach. He turned toward the window, the fading light outlining the tension in his posture, and Eleanor sensed that the conversation was far from over. Before either could speak again, a sudden commotion stirred from the hallway beyond the study door. Clara's voice rose, trembling and frantic, and Eleanor hurried toward the doorway without waiting for permission. She found the girl near the staircase, clutching a small wooden horse so tightly her knuckles paled. Thomas stood beside her, conflicted between wanting to protect his sister and refusing to acknowledge that she needed help. When Clara saw Eleanor, she rushed forward, burying her face in Eleanor's shoulder as tears broke free. Eleanor soothed her gently, asking what had frightened her, but Clara only shook her head, unable to form words. Thomas finally muttered, "She had a nightmare. She was trying to sleep and she woke up screaming. I didn't know what to do." His admission cracked something in Eleanor's heart, because it revealed the extent to which both children had learned to navigate fear alone. As she comforted Clara, she felt the Duke's presence behind her, and when she turned, she saw a rare expression on his face, raw concern that he made no effort to hide. He crouched near his daughter, speaking softly in a voice so unlike the guarded one he had used with Eleanor earlier. Clara reached for him hesitantly, and when he gathered her into his arms, Eleanor witnessed something shift within the man she had only begun to understand. The children's fear, their need, their tentative trust, it all converged into a single moment that revealed the truth he had been struggling to deny. He cared, deeply, perhaps more than he believed himself capable of. When Clara's breathing finally steadied, the Duke lifted his gaze toward Eleanor, and in that fleeting exchange, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that the boundaries defining them were changing. Not through declarations, but through shared burdens and quiet loyalty. Eleanor rose slowly, aware that leaving now would disrupt the delicate connection forming among them. Yet staying meant committing herself to a conflict far deeper than anything she had agreed to when she accepted this arrangement. The Duke knew it as well. She saw the realization in his eyes. The night settled around them with a hush that felt both fragile and promising. Clara clung to her father, Thomas hovered protectively, and Eleanor stood at the threshold between distance and belonging, knowing the choice she made next would reshape everything that followed. And for the first time, she felt the pull of something she could no longer ignore.